Hello again, friends. I'm Paul Estabrooks, and today as the snow falls outside and I finish off a hot steaming cup of coffee, I want to tell you the story of the Millennium celebrations of Christianity in the Soviet Union. Back in 988 AD, Vladimir the Great arrived in Kiev and baptized the first Christian converts in the Slavic area. So in 1988, 1,000 years later, there was to be a celebration of the history of Christianity in the Soviet Union. Now, you know very well the Soviet Union was a communist state. Religion played no part in their ideology. In fact, if anything, it was to be obliterated. But, of course, it was impossible to accomplish. I mentioned to you in an earlier video that my family and I, video number 30 in this series, traveled through the Soviet Union on our way home to Canada in 1986. In 1987, the Soviet Union celebrated the 70th anniversary of their revolution that occurred in 1917. And now, in 1988, they were about to celebrate the 1,000-year anniversary of Christianity in the Soviet Union. Now, it was really the anniversary of Christianity in Ukraine, because that's where it all happened. The baptism occurred in the Dnieper River outside the city of Kiev in Ukraine, today the capital city. And yet, because the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, they claimed it for the whole empire. Research on the situation in the Soviet Union, especially for Christians, was done by an organization called Keston College out of UK, headed by an Anglican priest named Michael Bordeaux. And he and his team did an incredible research job on the number of Christians in prison and on the situation of church closures and denominations that could not get registered in the country. And these items were communicated all over the world from Keston College in the UK. In Canada, an arm of Keston College, a support arm, was established by a lady named Maureen Giroux. Maureen came to Keston College in the 1980s and said, I want to set up a Canada support base. And that's what she did. So she documented the situation in the Soviet Union for people in Canada. And she produced something called the Millenium document. Now, it talked about the 1,000-year anniversary of Christianity and how things were so terrible in the country itself. There were well over 200 Christians still in prison, despite the possibilities that glasnost and perestroika seemed to open. Her conclusion was that glasnost is only for the West. It doesn't mean anything for the people of the Soviet Union. And she made a document which was sent to many people to sign as a petition. The document asked for the release of prisoners of conscience, which is what everyone was called if they were even religious reasons in prison, and for the recognition of all denominations in the country, and for the right of emigration for Christians and Jews out of the Soviet Union. Because, as you know, that country was very difficult to escape from, and many people tried in many different ways over many different years. And so this was the Millennium document. It was sent to Ottawa, and many members of Parliament and even cabinet ministers and others in Canada signed this document. It was then sent to churches and denominations throughout Canada and individuals, and many thousands of people signed this document. Well, Maureen decided that we should possibly go to the Soviet Union and present this document to the authorities there. She went to Ottawa, and Ottawa External Affairs agreed that it was probably a good idea, but that it could not be done as an official government operation. It needed to be an independent operation as an activity, but certainly backed up and supported by the Canadian government. This was in early 1988. So she recruited 12 people to go to the Soviet Union to present this document to the authorities there and to see what could be done to generate some kind of change for Christians in the country on the year of the 1000th anniversary of Christianity. She recruited 5 Roman Catholic and Lutheran priests, most of whom were bishops. She recruited 3 university professors who had ethnic backgrounds in the region. Remember, the region of the Soviet Union was huge. Canada has 5.5 time zones across it. The Soviet Union had 11 time zones across it, and it incorporated the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, as well as Belarus and Ukraine in the south. And all of these countries and different ethnic groups were part of what was called the USSR. In addition to these 8 people, she recruited 2 journalists, and then she was one, and she asked me to join, representing Open Doors Canada. One of the 2 journalists was from the United States. The other was a young lady from CTV television in Toronto. But the American was Carl Lawrence, my friend and a former boss, and the man with whom I trekked through China to document his book called The Church in China, which I mentioned in video number 29. Carl was my roommate, and we joined the group. 2 days before we were to leave, and it was around Easter time of 1988, Easter time on our calendar, the Gregorian calendar, we learned suddenly that all of our visas had been canceled. And so we thought the trip was off. But the External Affairs Department in Ottawa did not like that. And Ambassador Turner, the Canadian ambassador in Moscow, did not like that. And so they put every bit of pressure they could on the government, and finally our visas were reinstated right at the last minute, like hours before we were to get on the airplane. And so the 12 of us, all Canadians except for Carl, flew off to Moscow via UK and London to arrive on the Wednesday of Holy Week. Now that's Holy Week on our calendar. Remember, in this country and many others of the Orthodox Christian faith, they go by the Julian calendar, which in that year made Easter 1 week later than on our calendar. So now we arrive on Wednesday of Holy Week on our calendar. We have a briefing with Ambassador Turner, a wonderful brother, and another Christian lady who worked for him and his team in Moscow, who was very interested in our helping to sponsor a family who I will tell you about later. We met with them on the Thursday because Friday morning and Friday evening were to be our 2 major appointments to present the Millenium document. Friday morning at 9:30, we all went to the Department of Foreign Affairs, where we met with the deputy leader of that group and 6 others of his team. They were very cordial. We actually sat under the picture of Mr. Lenin. I wanted to have my picture taken with, only he was dead, so I had to stand under his picture to get my picture taken with Mr. Lenin. And in this room, we spent 4.5 hours talking with these officials. We presented the document. And of course, with it, we also submitted a list of 237 prisoners who were Christians and we believe were only in prison because of their faith. The leader of the group did say, "We've seen this list of prisoners before. In fact, it's like the drum, the irritating drum of hitting the same note on the piano over and over and over and over and over." So we knew that this was not anything new for them, but they knew about this. And of course, their main position was that these people had to be criminals or they wouldn't be in the Gulag. And they maintained that pretty much through the day. He interestingly used biblical imagery, knowing that many of us were, quote, religious people or representing different religious groups from Canada, from Scripture. For example, he said, he says, when we look at you, it reminds us of Jesus' story in the Scriptures. When he talked about the Pharisee who stood up and thanked God for how good he was and how much he tithed everything. He says, that's how we look at you. And we poor Russians are left as the publican, having to say, God be merciful to us, a sinner. And it was quite interesting, his biblical analogies used. We went through all kinds of discussions. To me, the biggest thing that came out of the points that they made was that they did not want to have an enemy image. And they felt very strongly that our media in the Western world during this Cold War era had made an enemy of the Russian people or the Soviet Union people. And they did not want to have an enemy image. He said, we are people. You are people. We do not want to be your enemy. But he promised to take the document, he promised to take the list of prisoners and work on it. Now, there had been a few prisoners released after Glasnost and Perestroika were declared by Mr. Gorbachev, but they were very few. One of them, of course, was Alexander Ogorodnikov. And as we left that meeting, Maureen Giroux, our leader, said, I just got word that Ogorodnikov is at his office and he's willing and available to see us if we get there right away. So, skipping lunch, we tore off in taxis to Ogorodnikov's office, and there Maureen gave Sasha Ogorodnikov a big hug. Now, back in video number 25, I believe it was, I told you the story, the prison story of Alexander Ogorodnikov. And God willing, next week I will tell you the incredible time we spent with him on this event, Carl Lawrence and I together, on the following day. The day that we met with those government officials was April the 1st, which Christians jokingly call the special holiday of the atheist, because the psalmist said, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And so April Fool's Day was the day which we met with the government. And it happened to be Good Friday on our calendar as we had that meeting. And after meeting with Ogorodnikov, we went to visit the Council of Religious Affairs. And they were very, very unwelcoming. They were not happy with our list. They would not even accept the Millenium document that Maureen wanted to present to them. They refused to accept it. And they were very belligerent in the discussions. We spent 3.5 hours with them also. And it was a very blustery session. They said, you've got 237 prisoners on your list. Here's our list. There are 19 prisoners of conscience in the Gulag. And that was the discrepancy between our list, which was documented by families of the people in the prison, and their list. And they were not at all happy discussing things with us. Now, just the year before, at the end of 1987, there was a special conference in Holland on human rights that had a delegation from Moscow there, and Brother Andrew was one of the men on this council of human rights that where the discussions were being held with the Soviet Union. Jimmy Carter's wife, Rosalind, was also part of that group as well. And during that time, when they were together with Mr. Berlatsky, one of Gorbachev's close advisors, and one of the men from the religious council that we had just met with, they were mentioning that they had a shortage of Bibles, and Brother Andrews stood up, and without even having checked with his board, but being the dynamic person he is and was, he said, "I want to offer you and your church in the Soviet Union 1 million Bibles." And he was referring to New Testaments with Psalms and Proverbs. And that proposal was made. Now, when we met with this council in the spring of 1988, they had not yet decided whether they were going to accept it, and they told us that they checked with the Bible Society in the UK, and the Bible Society told them, hold off on this one for a while. But as it later turned out, they approved that, and those 1 million Bibles were legally trucked into the Soviet Union from Europe and Holland, and were distributed through the Russian Orthodox churches there. On Sunday of that weekend, which was Easter Sunday for us on our calendar, Carl and I and one of the university professors, Dr. Sam Nezdely, whose grandfather was a Ukrainian Baptist pastor and spent time in prison, the three of us went to Moscow Baptist Church for what was our Easter. And everybody there knew Sam Nezdely. In fact, people came up asking him for New Testaments. He had taken 12 of them into the country. They were discovered at customs, but were allowed to go through. Things were starting to slowly relax in that regard. He also was known by the pastors, and so we had some interesting briefing sessions with the pastor. But the church was jam-packed. There were more than 1,000 people jammed into the church with standing room only. They were standing everywhere. And there was, fortunately for us, a visiting English-speaking preacher that Sunday, whom we could understand easily before translation. And because it was Easter on our calendar, they went through the liturgy of Easter that every church in that country does. And it begins with every person who comes to the microphone says, Christos voskres, which is Russian for Christ is risen. And the people all respond back, Voistinu voskres, and Christ is risen indeed, or he is risen indeed. And that is said 3 times. Each time a different person comes to the microphone. And we experienced that in Russian for the first time, and it was very amazing. The next day, the group of 12 of us split up into 4 different parties. One group went to Lithuania for the rest of the week, another group to Latvia, another group to Estonia, and 4 of us went to Kiev in the Ukraine. And I need a whole session with you just to tell you the incredible story of what happened with us in the Ukraine. But how it started was when we left Alexander Ogorodnikov's office on Good Friday, our Good Friday. The KGB guys were outside and took photographs of every one of us, and from that point on, we were followed everywhere we went by KGB guys, and they didn't even try and hide it. They were just, obviously, they're blatantly following us, kind of an intimidation tactic. When I tell you the story of our 5 days in the Ukraine, the title of that video will be Chased by the KGB, a couple of weeks coming up. After the Ukraine, we all returned to St. Petersburg, which at that time was still called Leningrad. And we had a briefing together of what we experienced in the breakout times that we had as 4 different groups, minor groups. And the amazing thing was that even the Roman Catholic priests were complaining about the fact that the seminarians that they met as they traveled there to visit with church leaders did not have a Bible. They were desperate for Bibles, and we found that everywhere we went. But it was interesting that everybody found that everywhere. There was just a real cry for Bibles in 1988, and that was one of the main things that people talked to each of us on the group about. But we spent the last weekend, which was Easter weekend on the Julian calendar, which is the Orthodox pattern, in Leningrad, and it was snowing. It was like a scene from Dostoevsky. And what I'm looking at as I look out my window today of the snow lightly falling, and we stood outside with the crowd. We had tickets. We were given tickets to go to the midnight service. At midnight, it was at the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, is the church where the church leaders of the Orthodox Church were holding Easter Sunday morning service. We all stood in the church with a candle burning, and it lasted until 4 o'clock in the morning. But at midnight, the priests would go out and walk 3 times, I think it was 3 times, might even been more, around the church building, and then they would come in right at midnight. Then they came in the door of the sanctuary, and the first priest that led the group said, "Christos voskres," and everybody in the church answered, "Voistinu voskres," and "Christos voskres," and they did this 3 times. Christ is risen. And it was amazing to see how many people in a communist, atheistic country wanted to be at that service and celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And that's when we learned that their day in Russian, for the name of the day of Sunday, is literally the word resurrection. So Resurrection Day is the word they use for every Sunday. And we enjoyed that service immensely. Now, the 3 of us who are evangelicals among the group, Carl and Sam Nesdley and I, went off to the Baptist church on Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning, their Easter, to enjoy that service. And Sam got to bring greetings and to introduce us, and we enjoyed the fellowship there on Easter Sunday. And that afternoon, we flew off to the UK, where we were going to Monday have a briefing with Keston College, the group that kept all the information flowing about what was happening with the church in the country. And while there, we met Valery Baranov. Valery was one of the few dissidents, Christian dissidents, who had been allowed to emigrate. And he had been imprisoned because of his music. He was a musician with young people, and that's a big no-no in a communist state. And we met Valery Baranov, and sometime later, Diane and I were pleased to be able to host him on a visit to Canada in Mississauga. And this was our picture with Valery Baranov, the culmination of the celebration of the millennium of Christianity in the Soviet Union.